Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Thursday, January 25th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. On this episode, we have part 2 of our Outfield Preview. If you missed part 1, that is the episode right before this one in the feed. We started our position preview series a little over a week ago and moved around the infield, almost through the position players now. And some things have actually happened, both in the fantasy industry and in baseball, in terms of some key signings and player movements. We're going to catch up on those things first before we get back into our outfield preview today. Let's start on the fun side. Let's start with some players on the move. It finally happened. Rhys Hoskins is a Brewer. It's a 2-year deal with an opt-out after the first year. A much-needed power bat addition for the Brewers, a guy that tends to be 20 to 30% better than league average in a typical season by WRC+, going from a hitter-friendly environment in Philadelphia to at least a park that boosts homers, even if it's less hitter-friendly all around with the move to American Family Field. But we talked about him on the first base preview. I thought he was one of the better values at the position. Now that he has a home, I think the reasonable assumption is that it's going to take a little more to get Rhys Hoskins in your draft. He's probably going to creep up the board and end up somewhere in that pick 140, 150 range, just based on the track record that he has put together as a great power hitting first baseman.
It's a fair point that you bring up, though I hadn't seen talked about much, is the sort of hit suppression. He does strike out more than league average, and sometimes for his career, 48% fly ball, 50% fly ball guy that has managed to avoid the 220s. There is a chance that this move makes him more Schwaba-like, more Schwarberian. And you get more of a 225-35 type package from him.
Possible. But I think 30-plus homers are still very much in play.
Yeah.
Good run RBI totals, just as a result of being a high-volume player. Initially, Jake Bauers had a spot atop the depth chart in Milwaukee at first base. He's still there as part of the first base DH rotation, but I think you could take a significant chunk of playing time away from him with the addition of Hoskins. Brewers also added Christian Arroyo on a minor league deal on Thursday. Today's Thursday. I don't know what day it is. Thursday morning. Probably some extra competition for that third base spot, which is also a bit of a weak spot on the
depth they're done
right now.
Spending in terms of, is it going to be Toro? Not Toro. That's Toro and Rojas.
Arroyo.
Oakland. Turang and Monasterio Black.
Probably Tyler Black once they decide he's ready. By far the most impactful hitter of the options they have.
But not a free agent at those two positions, you don't think?
Doesn't seem like it. I think the one thing you could consider is if this lingers on, free agency for a lot of key players like a Matt Chapman, if he's still a free agent in late February, maybe a 1-year pillow deal for someone like that becomes possible. But my read on the Brewers is that they're reluctant to add players on long-term contracts right now because they're kind of caught in between trying to figure out if they need to make a move into their next competitive window with the young prospects they have coming up. I think their ideal outcome is to not have a down season, just sort of bridge the gap perfectly. But as we know, that can be pretty difficult. But if you think back of 5 or 6 years ago, they traded for Christian Yelich, I think in 2018 on this day, and they signed Lorenzo Cain to a 5-year deal around the same time. I don't think a deal like that Cain deal is coming for a guy like Matt Chapman. It'd be great if it did, but it just doesn't seem like that.
Even that one was, I don't know if it was below market, but it was a mid-market type deal. It wasn't like a 5 and 50 type thing where, that wasn't like, what's the 5 and 50 of today is probably, 5 and 100 actually.
Right.
580. Like, yeah, maybe that's not on the table either. But we had a real surprising one in Houston.
Holy smokes. Yeah. Josh Hader to Houston. I thought, I looked at Ryan Presley. I thought the numbers in terms of what you have in the Stuff Plus model, the underlying numbers for the season, everything looked so good for Presley. I thought there's no way they would be the team that would throw big bucks at Hader. They have a proven closer. Why would you bother in this case? There's other things in this roster you could potentially upgrade. It doesn't hurt, right? It's adding another great arm to the bullpen, but this is a tough break. If you drafted early and thought Ryan Presley was in the circle of trust, I certainly would have thought he was in there. I just didn't do enough early drafts. Now he's a setup guy by all accounts.
little bit old for me, and the knees. The knees have been an issue, and so I had him just outside the circle of trust. And I do find it interesting that, as we talked about it on the 3-0 show, this seems to be kind of a short-term nod and like a playoff nod. Like we have enough in Verlander, et cetera, to set up a playoff rotation. We have enough back end pitching to, get our way through those 5 days, those 4 and 5 days, and get to the playoffs. Let's have an amazing bullpen in the playoffs. And that's kind of how I read this. Also, Presley's deal, I believe, is up after next year. So this is kind of like signing the replacement a year early so you can have both.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of thought maybe Abreu would take over, but having Brian Abreu and those two is pretty stellar. I mean, this has got to be the best bullpen now on paper, or at least top 2, 3,
Yeah, it's as good as any trio you're going to find league-wide, just in terms of overall quality. So a tough break for Ryan Presley if you happen to draft him early, if you got him in a keeper league. Actually, I do have one Ryan Presley share. It's in the XFL, the league that we do the auction for in the fall. Yeah, I just thought, I got 20 to spend on a closer. I better get one that's not going to lose his job.
Closers are Felix Bautista and Ryan Presley.
Presley is the only closer we have in that particular league, because usually in the March supplemental, there's some guys that have emerged. We thought we'd get our second closer then. Now we have to consider the possibility of just punting the category outright.
Or I need to get 2 in that draft, yeah.
Which is not great, because that's where you get your prospects. So
yeah,
I'm not really psyched about that landing spot, but it does make the Astros bullpen better. How about Robert Stephenson landing with the Angels? We've seen some follow-up news that's come down in the days since. He's not Bob Steve. He's not necessarily going to close, even though he's got the best stuff in that bullpen. It looks like Carlos Estevez, at least to begin spring training.
Oh, has there been news?
He's for now the guy. Now, Perry Minasian said Tuesday Estevez remains the team's closer on paper, even after the Robert Stephenson signing. That was according to Taylor Blake Ward of the Sporting News.
That was I used my divining rod and thought that Estevez might at least start the season as a closer.
But Minasian did say the closer decision ultimately is up to Ron Washington. You got a new manager there who's going to do things his way. I think you could see that job change hands over the course of spring. I would not be surprised. Stephenson
it's kind of one of those
should be the guy.
Deals, I think. It's not a stay away, because one of them is going to be all right. And yeah, the stuff bet is on Stephenson. So
yep. And they brought back Matt Moore too, so their bullpen actually got a lot better with those 2 additions, regardless of who actually
amazing that
saves.
Matt Moore came back. Just in a non-fantasy standpoint, the fact that Matt Moore went back to the team that jettisoned him after the trade deadline to try and save money to get under the cap, he goes right back, and like. This is just like I'm going to make another $9 million. I don't like. It's not like I'm joining a contender, like joining the team after Ohtani leaves.
Maybe he just wanted to keep things in place. Maybe never even got rid of the apartment or the house, like Anaheim. I don't know if he's got children or what the situation is, but might have been more comfortable to just stay. The Dodgers added another starting pitcher, James Paxton, added to their mix, and I think you were starting to say that as you project out innings for this entire group, the number just keeps going down. We know Paxton's had a lot of difficulty staying healthy. You mentioned in the 3-0 show, the fastball velocity was back. The breaking ball velocity was still down. So there's still a question as to whether or not that's going to come back.
He had no idea why. But I was also trying to rank Emmett Sheehan for the rankings that should come out on Monday. And that's January 29th, because you might be listening to this whenever. Is that the leader in innings last year for the Dodgers was Clayton Kershaw with 130, and that the fourth best starting pitcher by innings had 60 innings. It was like Michael Grove. And this is a team that is kind of, without telling people, is running a 6-man rotation. Most of their pitchers pitch on extra days of rest. They just don't call it that. So I immediately downgraded all of the Dodgers in my rankings. It's just like, I think the tops of that anybody, I think Bobby Miller will top the Dodgers this year with 140 innings.
I have more optimism than you do about the possible outcomes. I think they are just setting themselves up to be covered with 5 starters they like, no matter what combination of injuries might befall them. But I think there's a world in which you get some combination of Glasnow, Yamamoto, and even Bobby Miller all above 150. I think that can happen. I think they're probably going to be, as we've talked about, worked in a at least soft 6-man rotation. Maybe they don't come out and say it.
Another reason to do the 6-man rotation. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think next year when Ohtani's pitching again, another reason to have a 6-man rotation. And they've been doing it for a long time. They've been giving guys plenty of rest. It hasn't really hurt them in terms of fantasy value anyway. So it's fine. I'm okay with this.
Not any 2 starters, I guess, but
there's not that many 2 starters out there anyway. Maybe we overrate 2 starters just a little bit. But Paxton lands with the Dodgers. I thought maybe he'd land somewhere more desperate for pitching. You know, there's plenty of teams that need someone that could pitch like a 2 or a 3 at the price of a 4 or a 5. And you never know what you're going to get for innings from Paxton, but that risk reward profile is still pretty enticing, even with the aforementioned issues with the fastball or the breaking ball velocity.
Yeah, which he doesn't understand, but hopefully it'll figure itself out.
One more name to get to here. Joey Gallo has found a new home. He goes to the Nationals. That's a pretty soft depth chart in terms of carving out a role. I think we're at the point with Gallo. It's been 4 consecutive years with a batting average under 200. Only one of those years he's been really good in OBP. That was back in 2021. He had a 351 OBP that year. Is this sort of the last hurrah for Joey Gallo before a possible move maybe to NPB in the future, where he could go and hit 40 plus homers and just end up on a lot of posters and have kind of a second career overseas?
Yeah, I mean, who are some of the biggest ones? I went over there: Alex Cabrera and Tuffy Rhodes. You know, there seems to be a little bit of a Tuffy Rhodesian thing in here. I think Tuffy Rhodes over there had like 4 homers in a game and may have the record. There was some controversy where he has the record for home runs, but they still give it to O because they call it the like Japanese record.
Oh, so they do that over. Okay,
they do stuff like that here. Let's not like waggle our fingers at Japan.
No, yes, this is
we had a whole thing where it's like Aaron Judge is going for the American League record. Why is he going for the American League record? Like
baseball just trying to quietly remove Barry Bonds as the single season home run record holder. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, well, speaking of making changes to the record book, there is the least exciting menu item on our intro here.
Yeah, so a bit of a shocker here. This is becoming a kind of a national story, but the National Fantasy Football Championship, the NFFC, NFBC, it's all one big company. They have multiple sport offerings. You hear us talk a lot about NFBC leagues, NFBC ADP on this show. There has been a pretty big scandal that has broken in the NFFC. The contest acknowledged that they have fired an employee who was using internal controls to make advantageous changes to a contestant's roster after games had started. So there was a postseason contest in which lineup changes were happening after games had started. And this is
after guys had played a touchdown, minutes after that guy's back in the lineup.
Right. And it was discovered by the Ship Chasing podcast. Pete Overzet and their hosts over there kind of have this 45-minute episode if you want to kind of do the deep dive on it. So it's huge because it's an employee of the contest working with a contestant in the contest
who he had had a previous sort of relationship, demonstrable relationship, online relationship, some sort of either friend or family situation where they knew each other and interacted a bunch.
Right. So at this point, the extent beyond this particular contest is still unclear. It raises a ton of questions about the integrity of various leagues that have taken place going back years, right? So it's going to take time to really figure out how wide the scope of this really is. But it's it's tough. It's tough to see this happen. It's always something that you kind of worry about in fantasy sports and the sports betting space, the integrity being compromised. And unfortunately, that appears to have been a pretty significant issue here. But it's just a question of the magnitude right now. We don't know if this is something that occurred in other sports, if it occurred beyond the postseason contest, if it's been a problem for multiple years. But that is subject to, I think, a probably lengthy investigation.
Yeah, I've watched the long video. I don't have any inside knowledge beyond that, but I'm of two minds. One is that, these are high stake games, and the way that it was caught actually gives me some hope, because the way that it was caught was another team was watching that team because they were both in the top 10 and they were trying to make decisions off each other. And they just noticed that they thought that it was a big decision between Travis Kelce and Rice.
And you're not a football guy.
No, some guy Rice.
Rashee Rice.
Yeah, Rashee Rice. And the guy ahead of them, who had surged ahead of them due to another post-lock change the week before. The guy that had surged ahead of them picked Rashee Rice, so they were all celebrating, and they knew it was post-lock because you only see what the other teams have once the lock is in place. So they said, we got Kelce, he got Rice, like this is how we get past him. And so I actually think that's a sort of a positive thing, because since these games are so high stakes, you're talking about 100,000, 200,000, big overall prizes. I would assume that if it was happening a lot, other people would have caught them. So I don't know. It also, the other mind that is like, this was kind of a silly thing that's pretty obvious, like a post-lock change. And there are other ways that he could have been doing this. And it seems kind of unlikely that this is the first time ever. So that's where I am in my headspace, kind of stuck in between. I'm going to finish, the drafts that I've paid for and that I'm in. I enjoy the platform. We talk about it here. But in terms of signing up for the future, I kind of want a rigorous sort of examination of that person's moves and, I don't know, some sort of more assurance that this isn't super widespread.
Yeah, so there's a story from ESPN that's been picked up by ABC News. It's David Purdom, I believe, had the story. And Greg Ambrosius, who we both know, we've played against Greg in leagues, right? We've played in Labor. I've known him for probably over 10 years now, at least. Here's the quote from Greg in the story. Nothing's more important than the integrity of a pay-to-play contest. We built up 20 plus years of integrity through transparency in everything we've done. And by one action, it's put all of it in question. It's put me and everybody associated with our company in question. We're doing everything we can to make sure that we know everything about what happened, let people know, and to make sure it never happens again, end quote. Which at this point, I think that's as much as you can say. Yeah. Like you just have to figure it out. And I think that's what they're working to do right now. So I understand apprehension about wanting to sign up right now until there's more information. Completely makes sense. It's a really disappointing story.
Amateur sleuths out there. I in one of my group chats, they've got the free agent auction history for the player in question, and they're combing through it. There's apparently a $400 buy of Jared Kelenic that was probably not done for cheating. So anyway, on to outfielders. Speaking of Jared Kelenic, I don't think he's going to be in this one.
We might get to him. He's on the rundown. That was before we knew there was
20 minutes of
an industry-related scandal to talk about.
Yeah,
but there was enough other news to talk about stuff going on with players as well. We begin today, for outfield preview purposes, with Cedric Mullins. And this is tier 5 in the outfield. We're looking at picks 130 to 160. We're still working off NFBC ADP just to look at where players were being drafted. Again, we're going to continue to use the ADP for the rest of the series just for the sake of we need something to structure what people have been doing in drafts, what this means for the future. As I kind of indicated before, it's still too early to say. You get Cedric Mullins, Teoscar Hernández, Anthony Santander, TJ Friedl, Jorge Soler, Ian Happ. Really solid group of players that go in this group. And I don't know if there's a single one that I would say is like a full-on avoid. I think if there's one that I'm skeptical of, it's TJ Friedl, and it's mostly just the power that I'm really not sure about for Friedl. But of this group, Cedric Mullins was an early rounder each of the last 2 draft seasons. And what we saw in 2023 was an uptick in strikeout rate, accompanied by a little rebound in barrel rate, but he lost some time, only had 455 plate appearances, and that probably kept him from getting to 30 steals again. It really seems like kind of a pivotal year for him in Baltimore, just to establish himself as someone that they're going to continue to have out there on a regular basis as an everyday guy, because their outfield is also getting more crowded. It's not as loaded as their group of infielders right now, but they have options if they don't like what they're getting from Mullins.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to push back on that a little bit because I don't really think Ryan McKenna, Sam Hilliard, Jorge Mateo are very good options in center. And I don't think Colton Cowser is a center fielder myself. And so I think that they want him to succeed, and I don't think they have a ready-made replacement unless they start running Joey Ortiz out there, which would be interesting. But, it would be a way to use their infield surplus to do something different. But I think that he needs to be there for them right now. I think that's why they haven't traded him for pitching. And also, I wanted to just mention he got hurt last year. He had a fairly bad groin injury, and that was in May. And so what we got here on the screen for YouTubers is his hard hit rate at Fangraphs and his WOBA. And you see this huge dip in his hard hit rate early in the season. And that's got to be the injury. I mean, that a groin injury that he came back from maybe a little bit too early, struggled with after. What I like about this graph is that the hard hit rate recovered to 2021 levels by the end of the season. Now, his WOBA line does not. And it's not like he ended the season with a great September, but I did look, and there's not really a difference in how predictably important a second half is versus a first half. Second half is slightly more important than the first half, but you'd rather use the whole year. And what I see is a guy who projects to be an above average with the bat, above average with the glove, and a great, a really good fantasy player. And he's going below where he should be going. This is an $11 player, surrounded by, $5 and $8 players. So I've been taking Cedric Mullins where I can. I think a year off, a year of off season of rehab with the groin injury and everything. I could see him getting to 30 steals again. If I only get 16, 17 homers, I'm okay with that. That's non-zero. That's a non-zero power line. Worst case scenario is maybe he gets platooned. Last year, he was near league average against lefties and righties. He sort of famously used to be a switch hitter, and he stopped switch hitting. I don't know. Would Jorge Mateo is what is he? Left-handed or right-handed?
Righty. So he could be the small
Mateo
side platoon,
could steal some stuff from him, and yeah, that could happen.
But I like him as a cheap speed play. I think Mullins makes sense where he's going right now. There's still plenty to like.
There's not a lot of guys who could steal 30 bags who are available from here on out.
No,
and the guys who are often have no power.
There's a lot of similarities in the players that go for the next 150 picks in the outfield. You have this group of guys. It's mid-20s power with an okay average, kind of lowish OBP. You've got the barrelers with the high K rate that could hit 30 homers, but could also hit 220 if they have bad luck on balls in play. You have some big side platoon guys that won't see lefties that are going to lag a little bit in counting stats.
James Outman.
Yeah. So you've just got a few
Jared Kelnick,
a few common skill sets up and down the next few tiers. And when you find someone that sort of breaks that mold, that's probably the player you want to be the most interested in relative to the others in each cluster. Teoscar Hernández is exactly that masher that could have things go sideways because the K rate is so high, over 30%. But
he also belongs in the platoon risk category.
Yeah, but
although he's a right-hander, so
he's a righty who's getting $23.5 million. Yes, deferrals to the Dodgers.
Right.
why did the Dodgers bring him in if they're not going to give him a lot of playing time? I think the drop off in time, he got to 678 plate appearances during his lone season with the Mariners. He's probably going to lose 100 plate appearances off that just because they can mix and match. And I don't think they want his glove in the outfield every single day. I think that's a little bit of a downside for Hernández as well. But
because
I think
Ohtani is the DH.
I think whatever he's going to lose in playing time can be offset by the lineup around him. So, yeah, he maxed out playing time wise last season to get to 93 RBIs and 70 runs. He's going to come close to those numbers, even with 80 or 100 fewer plate appearances, just by being a part of that Dodgers lineup.
Yeah, it's interesting that this Dodgers line. I was just looking at that bullpen. It's funny how different the Astros approach the bullpen was.
Well, that's one of the spots everybody thought Hader might end up.
Yeah, they're super cheap in the bullpen, but they got to be cheap somewhere, I guess. Yeah, Teoscar is just not my kind of player in terms of the super chase and being 31. But even if he continues to add to the strikeout rate, which I think is basically where that chase ends up manifesting as you age, because you make less contact on pitches outside of the zone. Even if he strikes out 32% of the time, 33% of the time next year, what will he drop to with how well he hits the ball, the 50% hard hit rate and everything? Would he drop to like 240? I think he'd still be pretty valuable at 240, 25 to 28 with non-zero steals.
Yeah, barrel rate's consistently good. Doesn't look like he's showing any signs of slowing. The little thing in the metrics that gives you some pause, the O swing jumping up to 38.5% last year. Maybe more aggressive in a walk year. Hopefully something he can rein in just a little bit, even though he's still playing on a one-year deal since he ended up getting north of $20 million to go to Los Angeles. So I'm okay with Hernández. I just think there are some similar players that go later that I'm more likely to draft. I'm a little more likely to have him as a Dodger than it would have been if he'd stayed in Seattle. Or
I'm also, just looking for stolen bases in this part of my drafts a lot, especially in the outfield. Outfield's an easy place to get stolen bases. Somebody like Ian Happ is more exciting to me. I know Happ goes a couple of picks behind him, but with the 14 steals last year with the new rules, I kind of believe that since he was a steady 9 guy before that, Ian Happ was. He also hits the ball hard, not quite as hard, but he also doesn't strike out as much or hasn't recently, definitely doesn't chase as much. I like this sort of disciplined profile. He doesn't have any of those markers that make me nervous, like a 50% ground ball rate or a 50% fly ball rate. His BABIP is fine. He's just a fine player. He's just fine. He's not. I don't think that there's another level because he's already 29, and we've been hoping for kind of like maybe a big breakout season. But if the breakout season was last year, 250, 21 homers, 14 steals, I think Ian Happ can do something like that again. And it's kind of just more of the type of package that I'm looking for at this part of the draft.
I think as long as you've got a balanced team, Happ's exactly what you want in this range.
You further everything, right? Everything
keeps moving all your targets right where they need to go. A max volume player doesn't really have like a bad recent injury history. I just think all the skills consolidation we've seen from him looks pretty legit. Projections say everything he did in 23 is repeatable. I agree. I don't have a lot of pushback on this. If you're chasing speed in this group, Friedl sort of jumps out. He was a big miss for me last year. I had 0 shares. He popped 18 homers with a 3.2% barrel rate. I got to do some searching to see if anybody had similar number of homers with a lower barrel rate. It's hard to do that. But Great American Ballpark works wonders. 13 homers at home out of the 18. 15 of his 18 came against righties. He does have legit speed. He seems to be the preferred option in center field. So those two things are good, right? I think you can rely on the playing time against righties, the speed being there. Where do we go with the power? Like, what else are you getting from Friedl this time around? Because I am very nervous about that power.
And the projections are just like, hey, he's in this park. It's going to do it again. I don't know. I would shave 2 or 3 or 4 homers off off those projections. ATC is for 16 homers for Friedl. At least take that. At least take that projection if you're going to run with Friedl. On the other hand, the projections all say for regression in the speed category, but why? I mean, we're talking about a 28-year-old, I guess, maybe an aging related decline, but I don't think he's going to slow down that much in this new rule. So how about this for a projection for me? 260, 14 homers, and 30 stolen bases. Hey, what do I want from Cedric Mullins?
I was going to say, it's like light Mullins, right? Like it's just it's the slightly less.
To be fair,
version.
they go right next to each other.
To be fair,
see,
it's happening. It just gets into your head.
Do you know who the biggest projected bat is in this tier?
Anthony Santander.
No.
Well, no, probably Soler.
Jorge Soler, $15 player hanging out in the middle of a bunch of 10s and 11s and 8s. Jorge Soler does not have a job.
Yeah.
I can't draft guys. I mean, I can draft some guys without a job, but I don't think I can draft a guy like this without a job because I need to know what the team situation is. Right now, that projection comes on 644 plate appearances for Jorge Soler, 34 homers. Yeah, if he gets 644, and the projection is for a 119 WRC plus, so probably he'll play as a DH for whoever he signs with. But I want to know what that DH situation looks like, and I want to know what the team looks like. As a righty, he's probably not going to get platooned and lose all the playing time. But I just want to know a little bit more before I believe a 600. Like hasn't done 644 since 2019, and that was the only time he ever did it.
It's the Royals, right?
Yeah.
I think he needs to be on a bad team because it has to all come pretty much at DH. And most good teams have other guys that are good that they want to give breaks to defensively.
Who could we put him on? The worst.
The Blue Jays are showing interest, though.
Nationals, Rockies, Marlins. Yeah, see, I think the Blue Jays would be a good fit, but they have Alejandro Kirk, kicking around there, and so that'll have ramifications. And I think some of it for Soler. Like you could have maybe the platoon is not obvious to us. Like maybe Kirk's contact rate plays better against high velo fastball guys. So Kirk is in against high velo fastball guys and Soler is in against other guys. It's still, I think, going to cost him some plate appearances if he goes to Toronto. A good place for him to go for the DH would be like Washington. I mean, that would be a top shelf place for him to end up.
Yeah, he could do some damage there.
The Rockies signed Blackman for another year, so I doubt it. He could reprise with the Marlins. Pirates signed Kutch. Athletics, I don't know. Angels, I doubt it. Royals, I doubt it. Reds, I doubt it. Tigers,
I kind of like it for the Angels, actually. I like Soler a little more than Teoscar if the situations end up being comparable. I think the thing that helps Teoscar Hernández again is the Dodgers lineup. Soler's not going to end up in a lineup quite that good, but if he gets in a situation where he can play more, he might be more productive. He's a regular on the barrel rate and hard hit leaderboards. He doesn't always flirt with that 30% K rate either. So I like that. I think that gives him a little more floor. He is a 0 stolen base contributor, so you really got to make sure you're accounting for that as you kind of build out your lineup. But does he make more sense at this price than Kyle Schwarber does 60 or 70 picks earlier? Like, I'm not getting anywhere near Kyle Schwarber at ADP, even though there's ceiling playing time potential. I'd at least consider Soler if I'm chasing power in this range.
And the batting average hit is probably not as extreme.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. He has that 48 homer season in him, and on a bad team. Like if he went to Washington, I could see him do 40 plus. He did 36 last year and 580 plate appearances, so he still has that sort of top shelf power.
Yep.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think next on the list, Tommy Edman, if I'm doing this right. Tommy Edman is hurt. And what I last heard may not be ready for spring training.
Yeah, and Tommy Edman's is becoming a little more of a glue guy just because they've got a few younger players starting to pop up at all those positions, right? If you want to prioritize Wynn and Gorman and eventually Victor Scott, then Edman has to play less over time. I think Scott's going to take a little while, so maybe we see a good bit of Edman in center field once he's healthy.
But
they
Carlson
just give him a 2-year
has
deal.
Some stuff he can do. We will talk about Carlson where he goes, but Dylan Carlson's not a total zero. Like there's a chance that he finds some batted ball oomph and adds to what he has and becomes the starting center fielder himself.
Yeah. Edman's also younger than you think. He'll turn 29 in May. It's kind of like low
seems
double-digit
yeah.
homers, 20-plus steals. It works. It's just not exciting at this point because it seems like the arrow is just gradually pointing down. The next tier is full of players that you want to draft. At least it's full of players that I want to draft because I can sort of dream on some potential with most of them.
Yeah, this is an exciting tier, actually.
So this includes Wyatt Langford, Riley Greene, Chas McCormick, James Outman, Jarren Duran, and Masataka Yoshida. Really good group, kind of going in the pick 160 to 180 range. Langford sort of picks up our conversation from the end of our episode for part 1 of the Outfield Preview, where, look, it's 47 games in the minor leagues, and he's already number 1 on some prospect list. He just looks like a player who can do everything. He can control the strike zone. He can steal bases. He can get to a lot of power. He's a few years older than Jackson Chourio and Jackson Holliday. So if you look at him just kind of compared to those guys, you might say Wyatt Langford probably has a better day one floor just because he's a little older.
Yeah, but in terms of having an actual job waiting for him, it's probably he's not in the same tier as Evan Carter and Jackson Chourio because there's a way to build a full, competitive, just won the World Series team without him. And one thing I did want to clarify that was interesting, it sort of popped to me as I woke up in the middle of the night. It's funny about draft season. Like, I don't sleep as well because I'm like, I should have taken.
Did you wake up? I'm on the clock. It's like it stops overnight.
Yeah, I've actually rolled over at like 3 a.m. and checked if I'm on the clock. The thing that occurred to me is I'm in draft and holds right now, and so that has changed my bias. And so when we're looking at players like Jackson Chourio and is in specific, in a draft and hold, if you don't have free agency. So if you take a guy like him, then you have to take another 2 or 3 guys behind him that are starting level guys in case he's not starting, right? You need to take a guy in your bench that is a starting level outfielder that you can put in while Jackson Chourio is not in the major leagues, if he's not in the major leagues. And so that's different than a free agency league or, for example, like a 10-team head-to-head league. I would love to take Jackson Chourio. I would take him as my second or third outfielder, I think, because that's like a shot in the dark. And like, it's a YOLO pick. I'm going to, you only live once and I'm going to do this now. But I also know, my first bench guy is going to be a pretty good outfielder. My first bench guy, like where are we right now? If you're in like a three outfielder 10-team league, right now in this category, we're talking about maybe your 4th outfielder, aren't we? Yeah.
Probably 3rd or 4th. I have a
Even
funny build going right now where I've got 3 outfielders for my first 3 hitters, and I am hating it just because I'm not even far enough down the board to even be considering these names yet. And I feel like I'm going to get to the point where I'm just ignoring them.
Yeah. But yeah, in the more shallow your league is, the more robust your waiver wire is, the more that I want to take a shot at Wyatt Langford. In that 10-team, even in a 10-team 5 outfielder league, we take Wyatt Langford as your 5th outfielder, or your 4th outfielder. It's fine. You can even survive maybe a week or 2 while you're waiting if they put him down for a week or 2 and then bring him up. So there's different leagues where these things are more likely. I don't think I'm going to end up with a Wyatt Langford. If I could take somebody like a Riley Greene that I'm excited about, I think I have a little bit of. Did I send you something for Riley Greene?
Yeah, you did. I was gonna fire it up. The batch uploaded these and it didn't show up.
Here it is. Riley Greene's ground ball rate over time, and I see if you're looking on YouTube, the WOBA line, which is the blue line, goes up right when the ground ball line, which is the red line, goes down. There's an inverse relationship with how many ground balls Riley Greene hits and how well he's doing. And then you look at Riley Greene's minor league ground ball rates, and you realize that like he could improve upon the 48.9% ground ball rate he showed last year again. and you look at his sort of how his season went. You give him the 40% ground ball rate or the 45% ground ball rates that he was showing in the minor leagues, and you give him an above average ISO. You give him an above average ISO and probably all the playing time he wants on that team. I think you give a guy who's going to outdo his projections. I think he's going to hit 280 with 25 homers and 10 steals this year, maybe more, 15 steals. So if you want breakout potential with a job, and this is what I've been talking about when I talk about like oatmeal-ish floor has a job, but then a ceiling on top of that. Bradley Greene is that type of player that gets me excited.
Right. He's 23 and he's already got 2 seasons in the big leagues. Injuries have slowed him down a little bit, so that the keys are having a full healthy season, which he seems more than capable of, but then it's getting the K rate down as well, right? There's a future 60 grade on the hit tool. When you look at the Fangraph scouting grades, I think we're seeing flashes of that already. I like that we saw that.
Really good BABIPs, rate. Dude. Really good BABIPs everywhere. So like this is a guy who sprays it around, but he hits it hard.
Yeah, a little more in the barrel rate in 2023 as well. I think that is something that separates him. Is like you can give him a similar projection to other players in this group, but there's a higher likelihood that he actually exceeds that projection than some of the older players on here who might be, finished products already. I do really like Chas McCormick. He's also in this cluster. I'm surprised for the early draft market love that's being shown to Yainer Diaz. I'm surprised Chas McCormick isn't getting more of a boost so far. He should play more with Michael Brantley's retirement, plus Dusty Baker being out of the picture now. McCormick turns 29, though, in April. So I do think there's sort of this is all you get in terms of skills. But it's kind of like I feast on fastballs. I've got 5 category skills. Now I've got a path to everyday duty. It's a slightly older version of Nolan Jones in terms of the categorical balance. Less raw power than Jones, and certainly different park situation, not getting to play half his games at Coors. But I am surprised the market isn't more excited about Chas McCormick right now. Is there something you see in the profile that might be holding people back?
I think it's like prospect bias. I mean, he was never a prospect. When he graduated, he was the 18th ranked prospect on his own team, according to Fangraphs. He was a 40 future value guy. So this is someone who has outproduced what everybody thought of him. I like what he told me about becoming more upright. And I wrote about this last year. He became more upright, and just by becoming more upright, he was able to turn some of that opposite field power into pull power. And so what you see for him last year is his best pull rate. I think he can keep that up. He's 28 and he's maxing out what he's done, and he wasn't being played every day. New manager. So I think the upside comes from a new manager and the idea that this new manager is probably going to stick him in there every day.
Yeah, I think you at least want to see what happens. You could do that for the first 3-4 months of the season. If we see skills loss as part of maybe being a little overexposed, then come trade deadline, they can add some of the outfield mix and go back to playing him a little bit less. But I think as they're built right now, Kyle Tucker, everyday guy in right, you've got some combination of Myers, McCormick, Mauricio Dubon, and Yordan Alvarez to take center, left, and the DH plate appearances.
Dubon for me is a classic utility guy. So
yeah, his playing time really popped last year because of the Altuve injury.
Yeah, I think Dubon's a great guy to have on the team, and they had a bit of a heist there, I think, in getting him for almost free from the Giants, but he's not a starter for me. And so, with an older crew, you want to have a Dubon, but I don't know why Fangraphs is contributing to this by putting Jake Myers atop the depth chart there. And Jake Myers' career WRC plus is 88. His projection is 91. McCormick's is higher. I wonder if there's some sort of nod to defense because they have McCormick playing left and Yordan Alvarez DHing. But Yordan Alvarez has played a fair amount of the outfield. And what I was saying at the 3-0 show is I think the Astros are done spending because they're right up on the second apron of the luxury tax, and they wanted a lefty bat and they have a cheap one, John Singleton. I think that they're just going to do John Singleton and Yainer Diaz as their DH, and most days it's going to be Alvarez, McCormick, Tucker in the outfield.
Yeah, I'm looking here. Outs above average, which is, I don't know if it's just all outfield, but
he's like surprisingly okay, right? He's not
4.
terrible.
He's a +4.
Yeah.
Not a great arm, but
I got yelled at for saying him near DH.
No, I think McCormick's fine for center field. So
no, Yordan Alvarez is outs above average. Give me that.
Yordan? Oh, boy.
I think it's 0, which is fine.
Well, yeah, and again, I think that outfield, that left field in particular, I know it's a little tricky playing the edge, but geez, I mean,
yeah,
it helps. It helps cut down if you have a range problem. He's a -3,
but it's not like bottom. It's not like he's not among DHs. He's just among like not great outfielders.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think Yordan is well, and I think the other part of this too. If you like Yainer Diaz's bat and you're not happy with how he's catching, you're going to catch Caratini 50+ games.
Yeah.
And you're going to keep Diaz in the lineup as the DH, and Alvarez is going to have to play left, and McCormick's going to have to play center. So there are other factors in play that sort of dictate where McCormick fits in defensively. Last 3 in the group: Outman, Duran, and Yoshida.
I'm out on Outman.
You're out on Outman. He started off red hot, cooled off, kind of leveled off a bit.
So many strikeouts. Such a team that could put Taylor in the outfield. I don't think he's going to see many lefties. His projection is for $0.
His defense is really important, though, and I think Taylor looks pretty cooked. So I think it could be a strict platoon situation. You get power, you get speed. I'm okay with Outman here. I think there's enough to say, okay, yeah, I need 20 homers.
That's okay in weekly leagues, though, right?
Well, yeah, you got to watch the schedule, and those kinds of players can be frustrating if they catch a heavy run of lefties. What do you think of Duran as a guy who's alternate site? Haven't said that term in a little while. Alternate site power surge really kind of finally showed up in the big leagues a few years late. 482 slug last year was a career high. 33 for 37 on the base paths now as a big league player. And there was a strikeout rate improvement last year as well. I'm just curious if you see him as a clear platoon player, much like Outman, or if you actually see kind of a possible path to some time against lefties. I think the hard thing for him to make a leap into the top 100 is that the power really has to tick up even more, or he has to run wild. Like, it seems like he's appropriately priced, but there might not be another gear for Jarren Duran.
There's some real life concerns for me, which is that I don't think he's a center fielder. And this is a bit of a scouting thing. I mean, or just people in Boston are saying, duh. But the defensive numbers, you saw that outs above average up?
I was going player by player. I'll get it for you, though.
The Fangraphs defensive numbers are poor. When I watch him, it's poor roots. Like it's the tools are there, but it doesn't. Like there was a sort of iconic couple I think it was last year, where he just wasn't even in the right place. I think one time he just lost the ball. A couple of times he lost the ball completely. Like I don't know what it is, but for me, if I'm running the Red Sox, I put him in the corner outfielder. I put Cedric Rafaela in center, Tyler O'Neill in left, and Yoshida DH. And I run that out most days. If I want Wilyer Abreu in the big leagues and playing, then he'll be part of that mix. But I don't. That's my game one of a postseason series. It's Tyler O'Neill, Cedric Rafaela, Jarren Duran, and Yoshida DH.
Yeah, I think that's going to be their most common configuration, but because they've got Rob Refsnyder as a small side platoon guy they could mix in, and a couple of interesting multi-position guys trying to break through in both Emmanuel Valdez and Wilyer Abreu, that could cloud up the DH situation just a little bit too. Now. Your dogs are just furious. What are they so mad about? Deliveries?
The cat has been, because it's cold, the cat has been spending more time inside, and the cat likes to antagonize them.
Oh, yeah, that sounds like a typical cat.
So the cat is sitting probably in one of their favorite chairs.
And they have no recourse.
And they're just running around barking.
They have nothing they can do.
Because that cat would whoop them. We have this Black Panther large cat, like just a panther of a cat, that has swiped at him a couple times, has made everybody in the family bleed. I hate this cat.
I'm surprised you still have that cat.
So what am I going to do?
Find someone with fewer people in their home to take the cat and try and fix the cat. I don't know.
Just hope for summer when he goes back outside more of the time.
I guess so. Last player in this group is Yoshida. 15 homers, 8 steals in the debut. Low strikeout rate player. Pretty solid contact quality. I just wonder, where's the ground ball rate going to go? 54.6% his first season. I don't know if that's going to improve a little or a lot. We did see 20-plus homer seasons on 3 occasions from him in Japan, so maybe there's some room for that to come down. I noticed he's 23rd percentile in sprint speeds. He's probably not squeezing any more speed out of this profile. I think it could just be a little more average and a little more pop if he gets any better, but I think what you see with Yoshida is probably what you're going to get again in 2024.
Yeah, I fired up the old graph machine to give you guys a graph of his rolling ground ball rate, and then I realized there is no improvement. There is no upward. It's not any better.
Nope.
It's just always 50-55. So yeah, this is what you get. And it's a good player because, by hitting all those ground balls, he hits a lot of line drives. I think the BABIP outpaces his speed, and so it's a good player for them to have. I bet you they saw some redundancy a little bit with Alex Verdugo. In terms of here's a guy who makes a lot of contact, hits the ball on the ground, defense is iffy. So I think that they just decided to keep Yoshida. I don't know that there's that much upside, but from fantasy, the upside comes from could he get to 650 plate appearances? I think the defense actually is what costing him that full max volume, not necessarily platoon issues. And, I think he gets pulled early in games, and if they have Abreu there, they have another person who's kind of iffy in defense, but it's not going to be one of the better outfields in defense. So I don't really look at that outfield and say, oh, this is the person that will replace him, unless Duran didn't start or Rafaela doesn't start, and Duran starts in center and Rafaela replaces Yoshida, moves to center, and Duran moves to the corner. That's a possibility, but it is how, Yoshida loses plate appearances.
Yeah, I think the defense ends up being okay if you end up with O'Neill and Rafaela out there as 2 of the 3 starters on a regular basis. But we'll talk about O'Neill here.
Yoshida for the batting average, though, for sure.
Yeah, it's a good batting average.
One of the few places that, this point of this in the draft, you can be like, I can improve my batting average.
It's a slight flip on what you would get from Stephen Kwan, who goes in the next tier, where you're saying, I'm not going to get 20 steals, but maybe I'll get 15 to 20 homers, and I'll get 8 to 10 steals again from Yoshida. Brandon Nimmo leads off the next group. It says pick 195 to 215. You got Nimmo, Daulton Varsho, Lars Nootbaar, Kwan.
Love shopping here too.
Christopher Morel and Kerry Carpenter. I think we know that Lars Nootbaar is one of your personal favorites. You've worked out together. We saw a couple of things last year. The barrel rate came down and the ball was hit on the ground more often. Those things are connected. My dog's upset now. I think she wants to get out of this room because we're recording, so I'm going to try and appease her here momentarily. 3 IL stints, thumb, back, and abdominal. And that might explain the shift in batted ball quality.
For Lars Nootbaar.
Yeah.
When I talked to him over the course of the season, he felt like he was just a step away from, being able to pull that ball. It's obviously something that, he wants to do and that he did for the first 2 years. So I'm going to agree with you and think that there is another level where he puts together that, sort of 10 to 15 stolen base level that he showed last year with the pull rate that he showed in 2022 with the max EV that he kind of added. That's what he was doing when we were working out a drive line, was trying to add bat speed. So you can see that in the jump in the max EV and the barrel rates. So, the best season for Nootbaar, and we could be coming up on it because he's 26. That is traditionally the peak year. The peak year for Nootbaar, I think, is 275, 25 homers, 15 steals. And that's a super exciting thing to get down here, especially when the projection is fine. 260, 18 to 19 homers and 10 steals, So I think there's another level past this, and I love buying him here. I think just Nimmo is undervalued. And what's cool about this tier is whatever you need, you can kind of get here. As if you haven't kept your batting average up, then there's Kwan and Nootbaar. If you've kept your batting average up, there's Morel and Varsho. And Varsho, for me, has been a guy that's fallen in drafts. And again, did I give you a bit? Yes, I
made my own
Varsho. Yeah,
it's just a StatCast. It's a screenshot of a StatCast, mostly so you can look at that spray chart. I think we may have talked about this back in the fall.
This isn't going to change, I don't think.
He got really pull happy. I think part of what made Varsho more interesting when he broke out in 2021 is he was hitting the ball all over the park. It was a lower K rate, and I thought maybe batting average would be good to go with some power and speed. The approach he's using to get to more power is just one that makes you say, okay, 20 plus homers is safe, and we know he can run, so 15 plus bags is there, but he is a batting average liability with this sort of batted ball distribution.
I just don't know that, like, he's doing the like fly ball, pull fly ball, sell out for pull fly ball thing. And that means his walk rate has gone down, his K rate's gone up. And yeah, his power has gone up, but to do this kind of a sellout and have your reward be 20 homers in 581 plate appearances, the only thing that says to me that this might change is that he didn't have a great season, and he's been something else before. So maybe he'll spend the offseason being like, I don't know, selling out for power is actually working for me. 20 homers is like a low reward.
I also think we need to consider just changing leagues, seeing a bunch of different pitchers for the first time, being in a new home park. Like, those things matter. I could see him maybe splitting the difference between 22 and 23. So pushing the average back up to 230, hitting 24 homers instead of 20. And maybe if he's getting on base a little bit more, nudging up the runs and RBIs a little bit. We've talked a ton about the Jays as a group just underperforming last year with the new park dimensions at Rogers Center. If they can make a few adjustments around him, who knows? Maybe we get something a little better. He's fine where he's going right now. I like that he can help you in multiple categories.
Yeah, and defense is going to keep him on the field. He's not going to be replaced by Kiner Falefa or BGO for defense.
No.
And he's even going to slide over to center a fair amount against lefties when Kiermaier sits. So I think he'll be more of a full volume guy next year and get past, sort of 650 plate appearances. So I see 2020 plus for him. And again, that's great. Now, of course, the reason that they're all in this tier is they have some flaws. Nimmo's had some injury issues and isn't stealing like he used to. Steven Kwan doesn't hit any homers. Nootbaar has some injury issues, hasn't broken out like we've hoped yet. Morel strikes out too much. Varsho, the low BABIP with the approach. There's definitely flaws in this group, but I choose to kind of see the good because you're talking about pick 200 and later. You can kind of focus on, hey, what do I need right now? Do I need the power? Do I need the power and speed? What am I looking for? And you can kind of get it here. Like, if you need to, swing for the fences, Christopher Morel is literally doing that for you.
He is. It's working for him. I mean, this is a guy that's a bit of a StatCast darling. Hits the ball really hard, has some speed. I think it's just a question of where does he fit defensively? It's hiding him mostly is what the Cubs have to do, but he could have multiple position eligibility again, just because you can't. I don't think you want to make him a DH every single day. We've talked about Nick Madrigal as a guy that you don't really trust as an everyday player at third base, especially. So, if you're willing to take a little bit of a defensive hit, maybe a lot of a defensive hit, Morel could get a lot of playing time there.
Man, do you know that Madrigal, in order to throw the ball across the field, has developed a coping mechanism where he takes like 4 steps?
It's not great. And with Morel, you got a guy. Okay, so here's the thing. Think about what the Giants did with J.D. Davis, who's like 8 years older than Christopher Morel.
Yeah, can't you coach up Morel?
Christopher Morel has 99th percentile arm strength. So if you can't get him with footwork to become a passable third baseman, what are you doing? Like, there's so much there to work with, and the payoff on the offensive side could be massive. I know he's got that free swinging approach that gets him to the gaudy barrel rate. It's a 15.9% barrel rate. It's fantastic. You want a guy like that in your lineup. It's the Teoscar Hernández profile as a hitter with someone that might be able to play on the dirt. This is a good story so far in terms of what he's done as a hitter. Try to find a way organizationally to make it and a little better on the defensive side.
I think, I was going to say maybe there's some real low floor concerns in terms of like, what if he doesn't play every day? What if he's a utility guy? What if he's a halftime DH or something like that? He has a 110 plus WRC plus projection. Morel does. So like, do you think this team can afford to bench a guy like that?
No, what is that? Like their third best hitter?
Yeah. So I'm playing him, and I think he's gonna. You just got to figure out where he's gonna play. And what's interesting is that he doesn't have multiple eligibilities yet, but at some point we'll come up with a list of players that should add eligibilities in the future. I mean, I just brought up one. Sedena Rafaela may add, some infield eligibilities going forward. And I could see Morel adding third base pretty easily.
Yeah, Rafaela, I know he's moved around a little bit in the minors, but I think he's their center fielder. I think they're just going to have to say, we need his glove out there. Let's see if he can figure it all out as a hitter on the fly. Like there's a lot to like. There's speed that should be there right away.
Seems like the kind of guy that could really benefit too on the hitting side from just being in every day.
Yeah, don't play games with his playing time. If you got to bury him at the bottom of the lineup for now, you get plenty of other guys that can hit in Boston. Stephen Kwan, carbon copy of his 2022 breakout, just with a dip in batting average. I think, you split the difference. He's fine. It's cheap speed and not much else. Maybe some runs. What do you think about Kerry Carpenter as sort of another player that is like Morel in that the ceiling for playing time might not be maxed out? I think this is more of a classic big side platoon role because Carpenter is a lefty. Went for 6 for 6 as a base stealer on top of the 20 to 25 home run power that he brings. I think you could do okay with Carpenter as your last starting outfielder, but I like him a little more in daily leagues than in weekly leagues.
Yeah, it's a fairly big split, and you shouldn't necessarily buy all the way into a split that's been produced in 102 plate appearances against lefties. But the weird thing is that he's kind of a different hitter against lefties. He strikes out less and he hits 54% ground balls against lefties. Kerry Carpenter does. It's only 42% ground balls against righties. So I think he's kind of a spray, like I'm just trying to survive type guy. He like goes more oppo and like, you know what I mean? Like I think he rolls over more balls, and he's just, you could add some scouting to that split and say, I think he's going to max out as a, I get a little bit of Mike Yastrzemski type vibes, but a little bit better power, a little bit better park, and just a little worried that he settles in as a 2/3 player. And, I'm in enough weekly leagues where that's a little bit tough to deal with. But in daily leagues, I think he's a useful player.
Yeah, it might be a little underrated in leagues with daily moves. Shifting the focus into tier 8, we're going to find some similar skill sets down here as well. This goes from Jarred Kelenic to Lourdes Gurriel Jr., Tyler O'Neill, Starling Marte, Taylor Ward, Jack Suwinski, Jung-Hoo Lee, and Whit Merrifield, who we talked about on the second base preview, also fits in at the back of this group. Let's start with Kelenic, one of the most discussed players on this podcast in the history of Rates and Barrels. He gets a fresh start, and somehow with less pressure in Atlanta because he wasn't part of a blockbuster trade where he was supposed to be the guy, just gets to try and be as good or better than Eddie Rosario. And it was front-loaded 2023 production, looked really good early in the season, tailed off, kicked a cooler, went on the IL. Hard hit rate jumped 45.5%, still carrying a K rate over 30%. In some ways, this looks like Kerry Carpenter with more speed and some prospect pedigree, but even that sort of it's not fair to Kerry Carpenter. Kerry Carpenter has shown a higher floor than Jarred Kelenic during their respective times in the big league so far. So what could be different for Kelenic in Atlanta?
Here's what's different for them in terms of team build and stuff. Like Kelenic, there's not a righty on the Braves squad right now that fits in left field in a platoon with him. I mean, you've got Forrest Wall behind him.
No, that's like a pinch runner.
And yeah, I don't think he's like a major league starter, and he's a lefty. And then behind that, you have Marcell Ozuna, who played I think 0 games in the outfield since. Oh, he played 2 games in left field in 2023.
Yeah, he doesn't qualify. the vast majority of leagues. He was part of the UT only group.
Yeah. So I don't think it's Zuna. Then next is Lurie Garcia, who signed a minor league deal. So are they thinking he's a full-time player? I mean, and a full-time player in Atlanta is a full-time player. You know,
they're not messing around with a lot of shares there. I mean,
David Fletcher got outrighted. He's not even on the team. They're
just doing a lot of good spreadsheet work with their payroll, with the players that have come through. Matt Carpenter was there for a second.
So if you don't project any improvement at all for Jared, and you just expect one hot month and a mediocre month and then 2 really bad months, but you just play him all year, and then you look at that depth chart and say, well, he's going to get 650. A 650 projection for him, even with no improvement, is a 245 hitter with 25 homers and 18 steals.
Right. And of the players we've talked about today, or will talk about today, it's like 38 outfielders that have already played in the big leagues and a couple more that haven't debuted yet. Kelenic is right in the middle of the pack for barrel rate. Like he fits in this broader cluster, has a bunch of different ways to possibly be good.
Decent max power.
I mean, unlike some of the other guys that strike out 30% of the time,
like
he walks a little bit.
Watching him, looking at his splits from last year, like his monthly splits from last year are a wild ride, and not Toad's wild ride. I mean, we're talking about a WRC plus in March that was 169, and then it goes 98, 71, 90, 92. Like, he was never an above average player after March and April.
I know I say this every year, but I think we need to take players who are less polarizing than Kelenic and spend more time looking at how much they bounce around from month to month. The ebbs and flows of a season might not be as wide as that, but they're probably wider than you think.
Or somebody else from this tier. Let's just
who's a consistent player that goes somewhere near. Like, who do you think of as a consistent player?
I think of somebody who's not a consistent player is in this tier. Jack Suwinski.
How about Brandon Nimmo?
I want to look at
tier above.
I want to look at Jack Suwinski's real quick. I just want to look.
I would guess
Suwinski 163, 98, 110, 136, 55, 122. Woohoo! That was a much wilder ride. Okay, let's look at Nimmo. Nimmo, one thing that it does help you in being consistent is not striking out a lot. Nimmo's good. Walking a lot, because we're looking at WRC plus splits. So even when you're not hitting that well, you can be walking. And so there you go. Nimmo 152, 107, 138, 77, 130, 178. So that's pretty wild up and down. I mean, it's a positive one. It's a good one, but it's wilder than you might expect. I mean, in July, he was a 77 WRC plus player and no good, had no power.
And then there's always the
hit 161.
There's always the psychological. We remember the last thing that happened, the first thing that happened. We forget all the things in the middle. So
we forget Nimmo's July.
if your best or worst month is at the ends, we tend to remember it. If it's packed in the middle of the season, it just gets wiped away.
Yeah. But I did have a leaderboard that Suwinski's on real quick. I believe the barrel rate.
You did. I thought you threw him out there. One.
There we go.
Rate. No.
Barrel rate for the outfield. Aaron Judge, Nelson Velasquez, who's coming up in the next tier, I believe. Matt Wallner, who's going to go on our third day, probably. Joey Gallo, we talked about. Yoran Alvarez, Kyle Schwarber, Adolis Garcia, Mike Trout, Giancarlo Stanton, Nolan Jones, Jack Suwinski. In fact, when I saw that, Jack Suwinski and Nolan Jones, Jack Suwinski is Nolan Jones. Jack Suwinski and Nolan Jones are the same person. Just one plays in Colorado, which is good for him.
And there's a little bit more evidence so far that Jones can handle lefties. With Suwinski, not sure about that. But it's a question of whether they're going to give him the opportunity. That's what it always comes back to. It doesn't matter what you've done in the last year or two, so much as it matters how much your team is willing to give you that chance.
Yeah, and I think the Pirates are going to give him full playing time next year, I think. One thing that I like about Suwinski also is hidden in that volatility, I believe, is a decent upside, and if he can find some consistency, I think that would take his game to another level. Plus, just, for anybody who's, batting average focused, 224 batting average is bad, but he had a 112 WRC plus last year, Suwinski did, and he has a projection for 110. So I really think that the Pirates are going to play him every day, and that, he's one of their kind of young, exciting possible core members, like, as much as I like Giover Peguero, and Jared Triolo, like they profile a little bit more as role players. So if you kind of want to be like, who are we most excited about that is going to play for the Pirates this year? It's Jack Suwinski, O'Neill Cruz, and Henry Davis on the offensive side. I mean, Reynolds is like a veteran at this point. I'm just talking about like young core that could step forward. Maybe Hayes, but he's kind of a semi-veteran too.
I think I'm more excited about Davis than I am about Suwinski. Davis goes even cheaper. He's probably going to have to catch this year and pick up catcher eligibility too, so that gives you some bonus flexibility. 41.7% K rate with 132 plate appearances against lefties last season for Jack Suwinski. That is in the danger zone for, holy crap, it's not even close enough to want to keep giving him chances, but it's 132 plate appearances. You really shouldn't make a decision on that if you can afford to give him the playing time and see if he can improve.
There's some research I'd like to see is if you look at component factors for platoon splits, if you can, be predictive, you can find a way to be more predictive of platoon splits if you look at the component factors before you look at results, because what we find is that platoon splits are not predictive in small samples. And yet we see players that are totally different, like we're saying Kerry Carpenter and Jack Suwinski, the strikeout rate burgeoning, the ground ball rate changing. What if those things are actually more predictive if you focus on them?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think if I were in a decision-making position, the biggest thing I'd want as proof of concept that you deserve more chances against same-handed pitching is a low K rate. If you have a high K rate, you seem kind of helpless in that split. You're just overmatched. You're offering nothing.
O'Neill Cruz's problem too.
Yeah. But at the same time, if I'm projected to be a non-playoff team, I'm maxing out the players that I think could have the most long-term value, getting those chances to learn and hoping that they can make some progress. This group's full of different types of players. Like Lourdes Gurriel Jr. to me is the Anthony Santander roto bundle in a less pricey package.
Just so boring.
But it's cheaper than Santander. A little less power, I think, is fair to say. Probably better batting average floor than Santander, though. And I think late batting average, as we say often, it is hard to find. So I'd kind of like Gurriel where he's going. I think I said this at the time that he went back to Arizona. Happy that he's staying in a kind of comfortable place where things went so well for him last year. Tyler O'Neill probably gets the rare health grade D for a player in his late 20s. We'll always have 2021. And I think we've looked at him as someone that could possibly make good on a move to Boston, right? You get the green monster, you get the chance to pull the ball and be heavily rewarded. It's the question of whether or not he's going to do it consistently.
Yeah, we've got a rolling graph up on YouTube for Tyler O'Neill, and it shows his pull rate and his fly ball rate and his ISO over the last 2 years, and they are all in lockstep in that. When he pulls the ball in the air is when he has power. It's like pretty much the same graph, all three colors doing the same thing. And so I think that, I've talked to him and he said he wants to let the ball travel. And that's probably why he had the best strikeout rate of his career last year and one of the worst pull rates of his career. But I don't know that you say to yourself, let the ball travel, and have the year that he had last year, which is the second worst year of his career, or actually third worst, but below average. I don't think you hit, even as a player, hit 231 with 9 homers in half a season and be like, okay, that's the philosophy I want. And then you get to Boston and you just see that big old green monster. Like, I think that even if you don't say anything out loud, like your brain's gonna be like, go hit that thing. Hit the ball off that big thing right there.
He's been pretty much league average with the bat these last 2 seasons. You kind of add it all up together. It's like a 2020 profile. He still runs well around all these different injuries he's had too. Pretty efficient base stealer. I think it's just a question of like, where is that average floor? I think if he gets more pull conscious, maybe the batting average doesn't jump up that much if he keeps spraying the ball over. He's so strong. I think that's part of the temptation for him of letting the ball travel. Is like
I'll still hit it out.
We've seen the guy. He can take an outside pitch and drive it out. So if you have that as part of your skill set, you kind of get caught where you're going to let the ball travel a little bit more. And this is the downside of that approach. I think is what we've seen these last 2 seasons.
The 522 plate appearance projection would be low if he's healthy all year, I think.
Right, but he's got one season where he's topped that.
Yeah. So I think in terms of like when he's healthy, I think he'll be on the field. The question is health. The player that is projected the best in this tier has never played in the big leagues. Jung-Hoo Lee. With a steamer, and it's also a funky projection. It's a little bit like Masataka Yoshida, actually, with a totally different skill set, but like 291, 12 homers, and 9 stolen bases for Jung-Hoo Lee. I think he will max out his playing time, and I think, coming to America and the Giants needing a center fielder and needing someone on that team to play every day because they platoon everywhere else. I think Jung-Hoo Lee is going to play every day, every day being 150 plus games. And so I looked at his batted ball stats, and I don't think he's going to hit more than 10 homers. But, given the rules being so different in the major leagues, and him being another year out from his ankle surgery, what if Jung-Hoo Lee is more of like a 10-15 guy or even a 10-18 guy? It seems like Stephen Kwan, a lot further down in the draft.
Kwan with a little more power, I think that's a skill set that plays. You got to be careful not having too many players like this because the power is light.
You couldn't take him and Kwan.
Right. Jeff McNeil's a little bit like this, I think, in some ways. Vaughn Grissom's projection is like this, but I think Vaughn Grissom's projection might be wrong. Like, I think he's probably a little better than the projection suggests.
Tell me about that.
Well, mostly, I think there's some evidence in Vaughn Grissom's profile that he's going to steal more bases than projections suggest. I think he's 13 for 15 at AAA. He went 20 for 24 in 74 games at High A. So he's been really efficient. He's run high OBPs in the past. I think he's one of those guys where we're going to see like more of his skills come together with a steady run of playing time in Boston. And if it's not some power, it's going to be a surprising boost in speed.
It's really, really good outcomes in the minor leagues for Vaughn Grissom.
Yeah, I think that's
his
what
lowest
I got
WRC plus above rookie ball was 135.
And he's been young everywhere he's played too. So I think people should be more excited about Vaughn Grissom. Not sure how he got in here other than having a projection that looked kind of similar power speed wise to Jung-Hoo Lee. Didn't expect
he doesn't have outfield eligibility?
I think he's shortstop only.
I don't see here.
He's shortstop only.
Yeah, what a weird situation that is. Yeah. But he'll play second base. So there's a guy who'll add. Luis Rengifo is supposedly in this tier, but we've talked about him already.
Yes.
Merrifield for me is like a non-draft. Like I think he'll end up somewhere where he doesn't have a full-time job.
He's a basic avoid. You've been getting a lot of Starling Marte, and the thing I noticed is the playing time just keeps trickling away. It's in the last 4 full seasons, throwing out 2020, going all the way back to 19, I believe. 586, 526, 505, and now 341 last year. He's 35, still under contract through 2025. So if he's productive, he plays a lot. 24 for 28 as a base stealer in 86 games as a 34-year-old. That's bonkers. Like, that's 35 to 40 steal speed. Even if you want to shave a little bit off for aging, 30 seems attainable as long as he can stay healthy enough to get closer to that 500 plate appearance number again.
Yeah, I think he's totally a guy who plays when he's healthy. I think that mostly the reason for that drop off in playing time is health.
Injuries. Yeah, it's all injuries.
It's all injuries. And so that's an easy way for me to use somebody, right? Like if he's healthy, he plays, I play him. What's hard is if he's healthy and he plays half the week, Mm-hmm. So I see him as a guy who's going to play every day when he's healthy. If he gives me 500 plate appearances, 12 homers, and 25 steals where he goes, that's exactly what I want. That's all I'm drafting him for. And there's an interesting thing here. that I can add from reporting, which is that even though his sprint speed has dropped to the 44th percentile, according to Baseball Savant, I had a conversation with Tommy Pham about this where he's pushing back on that. And he says that their consideration of what is a competitive run and what isn't kind of clouds the sprint speed statistic. For him, he said that they did a race in spring training where everybody raced and everybody they timed everybody, and Starling Marte won and was the fastest guy, on the Mets. And if you look at Statcast sprint speed for the Mets, he was like the 6th or 7th fastest guy. And so another thing that Tommy Pham pointed out is that if you're talking about times to first and stuff, guys with one-handed finishes, are a little bit closer to first base. And you have the difference between lefties and righties when it comes to running to first base. Not all that stuff. There is a times to first base stat on Savant, and it's actually more predictive than sprint speed, is something that Jeff Zimmerman found. So, that might be a functional speed stat versus a kind of theoretical speed stat. In any case, what you just brought up, 24 for 28 on base stealing opportunities, I think speaks to the fact that Marte's still got the speed. And that's why I'm drafting where I'm drafting. I made a conversation piece about how, Mullins. I like Mullins because there's not that many 30 still guys. And we've talked about 25 outfielders since Cedric Mullins, 30. Mm-hmm. And we haven't talked about a single guy that could steal 30 bases except maybe Jarren Duran.
Yeah.
Varsho in like a breakout year.
Varsho could get there, but you're probably right. I mean, maybe Wyatt Langford, but that's like fishing in a pretty different pond.
He hits the bound running and gets full playing time and just decides to steal all the time on a team that didn't steal. Like, I don't know.
Well, it's a fair point, but the other category for Starling Marte for batting average every single year is good in batting average. Last year's the outlier, 248 last year. The 2022, 292, 2021, 310, even 2020 short season, 281, 2019, 295. Like, we think this guy's going to hit 263 this year. Like, that seems kind of weird.
Yeah, I think it's a fine place. I have received some pushback, from a Mets fan saying, he's toast. One thing that I will say about the eye test versus, the statistical test is that I think it polarizes your opinions. And maybe I was I talked about Zach Geloff and how I thought he was him, and that's a polarizing opinion. Where I feel great about Zach Geloff because I've watched a lot of him and he had a great season and it was a great debut and there was nothing else to watch in Oakland, Mm-hmm. So that's a polarizing opinion. But I think it can go the other way where people see a guy and say, "Oh, that guy's toast." And
last player in the go ahead.
Yeah. And, when you hear somebody say that guy's toast, my ears prick up. It's like, oh, that could be a cheap pickup.
Toast is a buying opportunity.
Yeah.
Taylor Ward also in this group had a hit by pitch to the face. Really scary situation. I was watching that game. It was in late July. Didn't come back from it. I think you always wonder if there could be lingering effects just in terms of being comfortable in the box again after an incident like that. Failing that, I think he plays every day, has a prominent spot in the lineup for the Angels, and the barrel rate slipped a little bit last year, but I think he gets to enough power consistently where 18 or 20 homers with a lot of plate appearances should be there. Pretty decent run on RBI counts. Just kind of oatmeal-y for the spot, but doesn't seem like a bad pick if you're just trying to fill in with a solid player as your 4th or possibly your 5th outfielder in this range. Tier 9 is so big that I had to make 3 banners to cover it. It covers picks 250 to 300. It's a wider range, but there's so little that separates many of these guys. You could justify taking someone at the back of the group all the way up at the front, and I would not push back whatsoever. So I'm going to reel off the names. We're going to hone in on a few that we really like of this bunch. This starts up at Nelson Velasquez. You got Chris Bryant, Max Kepler, MJ Melendez, Brian De La Cruz, Parker Meadows, Sal Frelick, Giancarlo Stanton, Will Benson, Alex Verdugo, Willie Castro, Jake Fraley, Jeff McNeil, and Brent Rooker. So, okay. I got the first 5 on the screen right now between Velasquez, Bryant, Kepler, Melendez, and De La Cruz. You mentioned Velasquez earlier.
Love him.
Hits the ball really, really hard.
Yeah, love him. Hits the ball really hard. Played a lot when they were checking him out post trade, and I think that the depth charts are undervaluing how they're just starved for power, and I do think that there's a little bit of a like Velázquez, Pasquantino, Renfroe, Melendez problem. Where they've got these four. Are they all right-handers too?
Vinny's a lefty.
Okay. And Melendez is a lefty. That's good.
Yep.
But they're all poor defense. But I think you play Pasquantino at first base most of the time. I don't think you need to make time for Nick Prado.
No.
And if you don't think that you need to make time for Nick Prado, then you have enough space for Velázquez, Renfroe, and Melendez to play every day. So I think Velázquez gets to 600 plate appearances this year. And if he does do that, I think you're talking 30 plus homers.
Yeah, that's easily within reach. I mean, 17 in just 53 games last season. Interesting, too, that Nelson Velázquez's numbers against same-handed pitching were actually a lot better than his numbers against lefties. The small sample size, caveats, warnings.
That's
labels.
one I wouldn't project, but what I would project is that he is good against righties. Like, righty sees righties his whole life. So
yeah, I'm not worried about him like being passable against lefties. Based on what
I'm not saying
so
he's
far.
a great player because the defense isn't good and the patience isn't good, and he's not going to give you a great batting average. But I think they're going to play him.
So here's a fun fact. Well, it's not really a fun fact if you are this player, but Kris Bryant by WRC Plus was the worst outfielder in this entire group for today's show last season. He had a 73 WRC Plus. And he was hurt in his defense, played a half season, popped 10 homers. Didn't steal any bases for the second straight year. It's been a rough 2 years for him in Colorado. Kind of like as poor as the start for Trevor Story's time in Boston has gone. It's like, can we just push reset and see what happens if he gets near everyday playing time again? Because the slash line in year one, Kris Bryant hit 306 with a 376 OBP and a 475 slug. It was only 42 games. That was kind of in line with what I thought he would do in that park. Is that player still in there at age 32?
Just as a little funny aside, I'm in a draft where someone waited on outfielders so long that Kris Bryant is their number one.
Well, maybe that person will be laughing at all of us if he stays healthy and gets to that slash line from 22.
I mean, the max EV has just tumbled. I think that the injuries have sapped his raw power. He wasn't ever a guy that really got to his raw power as much as you might expect in terms of the barrel rate compared to his max EV. The ground ball rate has been advancing as he's as his career has advanced. The thing that I would be most sure about him doing next year is hitting for a decent average. I think if you re-rack a lot of the same skills he had last year, he should at least hit 260, 270. But I just don't know about the rest of it. The health, I don't think there's any stolen bases in there. The health is going to rob you. If he's in, should he play every day? Sure. The health is going to rob you of volume. And I believe the sort of ATC projection of 466 plate appearances, 16 homers, 263 average. That's pretty forgettable.
Well, it's just so many other players that go in this range should play more or project to play more because of better health profiles. So if you don't think the ceiling's there anymore, then I think he's an easy pass, even though he's very inexpensive. I don't know. If I don't have any other old injured guys on my roster at this point in the draft, I might actually take the flyer on Bryant just because
throw one on there.
I think the degradation of skills has been accelerated by poor health, and if he had just average health, there might be a little more.
Why not take my old guy and Marte?
Well, I may have already taken Marte, and then I won't be taking Bryant because I don't think you want a lot of
you don't load up on
30
that.
Injured dudes. I think that's a bad bad profile to lean into.
What did I text you? I like old guys, but I want them on discount.
Yeah, well, you're getting a pretty good discount, at least, on Kris Bryant. I don't think he's a must draft. I'm having flashbacks to last year thinking Anthony Rendon was the best value on the board. I don't want to make that same mistake again with Bryant. That's the sort of negativity on the health grade that I'm trying to be mindful of. How about Max Kepler, though? A longtime favorite of yours. who kind of did everything better than usual. I mean, the 36 homers in 2019 looks like a high water mark he'll never reach again. That was a super happy fun ball year. But just in terms of a career high in barrel rate, 12.2%.
I was hoping he'd steal a little bit more with the new rules.
Yeah, but like the slash line, right? This is like a good slash line. 260, 332, 484.
Best
almost
year of his career.
Best across the board, pretty much outside of that 19 slugging percentage and power output. I think the issue is like, can he sustain it? Like it's always been, needs to make an adjustment. He's made all the adjustments now. Is this finally a safe level for Max Kepler?
I think so. I think there's like a psychological component and a real life component, which is that, he did have the best BABIP of his career last year. And this is a guy who has a 253 career BABIP. So if he had a 288 last year. So if you add the 30 points of BABIP to, his career line, you basically get what he did last year. So you could just port that over. I'm sure if you start to parse the, where his hits were and stuff, you'll actually find that, it wasn't all because of the shift. It was, it was larger than that. But that's where the psychological component comes in, which is, I think, what you see in a 12% barrel rate and the pull rate that he had and the hard hit rate he had last year, which were all kind of what some of his better numbers, or at least his hard hit and barrel rate numbers, is like, hey, I'm not worrying about jacking this into the air to get over the shift. I'm not worrying about the shift. I'm just trying to hit the ball hard, and that's what I see in his profile, is a guy who finally just kind of let loose and hit the ball hard. So I believe in the power, and like, why did he get 491 plate appearances? Injuries, right?
Yeah, I think it's
what are his career handedness splits? 77 WRC plus against lefties, but last year 108, and he did get 97 plate appearances. So he has a platoon risk, a little bit of platoon risk, and then some injury risk. So I like him as like a fifth or sixth outfielder where there's another player right next to him. Like I think in this draft, he's my fifth outfielder, and my sixth and seventh outfielders are Cedena Rafaela and Edward Olivares. So I've got guys who are close, are going to be in the major leagues, that are going to play, that give me options. So if Kepler's going to run into a bunch of lefties or he's hurt, I've got these other guys I can put in that have, I don't know if they're similar skill sets, but have similar value in my mind.
I think that's a good way to think about it. And again, you may have this problem with other players around these last couple tiers. It's not just a Max Kepler thing. So it's part of the reason why you want to have probably 7 playable outfielders on the roster in a 5 outfielder league. There's a good chance 1 or 2 are going to need to be managed based on the upcoming schedule. We'll finish this part of tier 9 before we sign off for the day. So let's get Melendez and De La Cruz in here before we go. We'll kind of pick it up where we leave off today on part 3. MJ Melendez has continued to struggle against lefties. He got the opportunities last year. He's no longer catcher eligible in most leagues. One of the worst splits against lefties of anybody we've talked about today, a 33.3% K rate, a 58 WRC plus. So their patience may run out. They may decide to let somebody else get those chances.
Like Renfroe and Velasquez there.
But if you were to say, okay, fine, MJ Melendez is going to play almost exclusively against righties, I can get on board with that. I think it ticks up the batting average a little bit. I actually think there's still some more power he's going to get to 2 years in a row with a double-digit barrel rate. I think there could be 20 to 25 home run power. I think projections all have him at 20 to 22. I think it's maybe a little optimistic on the total playing time being that high again, but why not if you're the Royals? Like, continue to see what this guy can do based on the quality of contact that he's made and seeing some massive home run totals. He had 41 homers in 2021 between AA and AAA. This is a really exciting player if you can get him to his ceiling.
If you like Nelson Velasquez, you should like MJ Melendez. I mean, they're kind of similar. Melendez has a little bit better plate approach. Actually, like a fairly much better plate approach. But there's the platoon issue. One is left-handed, one's right-handed. You're a little bit, if you demonstrate the ability to play against righties as a righty, like, you're less of a platoon risk because they're going to want to get you in there. More of a daily league guy for me, Melendez.
Yeah, I think you like being able to get him out of there against lefties if you can. De La Cruz, 257, 304, 411 last year. Kind of more of the same in terms of the slash line. Played more, so he piled up better counting stats. Barrel rate slipped with the extra opportunities. It was just overall contact quality. It wasn't like he was pounding the ball into the ground more. I don't really see him as a cornerstone sort of player. I see him as more of a bridge player in Miami. Once they've got someone better to play, they'll play Brian De La Cruz less. I just don't know if they have someone better to play in that spot right now. So if you told me he could repeat 2023, I probably wouldn't fight you on that, but I don't know if I see anything that's going to bring him up another level.
Avisail Garcia has 2 more years on his contract. Is this year and next year.
Woof.
And he has really fallen apart. 63 WRC plus in 2022 and 46 last year. Minus below replacement, a win below replacement in 100 games. If he was any better, I would say that Brian De La Cruz would be a risk for losing his job. But I just don't see anybody who is going to take his job if it's not going to be Avisail Garcia. I don't like Peyton Burdick is 26 and was below league average in the minor leagues. John Birdie profiles as he may be their shortstop, I guess, if it's not Vidal Brujan or Amaya. Jonathan Davis is like just a kind of a pickup. So maybe I'm missing somebody on the prospect side.
No, you're not. You're not missing anyone.
Okay, nope. So I guess he's fine, but I don't know, players like this that project to be league average with a bat and don't have defense just make me nervous. You know, it's like, what if something better did come along, or what if he played okay and the team was good, and then they decided, hey, that's a place we can upgrade at the trade deadline. I don't know. And then in terms of fantasy, 260, 20, 4 stolen bases, like used to be kind of close to average, and maybe it is an average fantasy line, but it's with a down arrow for me.
Find someone that does something better, or at least offers you a reason to think that there's one more level there, because I just do not see it in this case.
There are guys that go later than him that I like better, for sure.
There's one guy in the org who's not a top prospect who I did draft in our draft and hold that we were in against each other a couple weeks ago. He's first base eligible, not outfield eligible. His name's Troy Johnston. He's a lefty. He's like 26 already. He'll be 27 in June. He hasn't debuted yet. He had 26 homers. 26 homers with 24 steals between AA and AAA last year. If you're the Marlins, find a place to play that guy. Just give him a chance. See what can happen. Your team isn't that good. Like, you can find some plate appearances for Troy Johnston.
This could be something where a spring matters.
Spring could definitely matter. He's played some in the corner outfield spots in the minor leagues. Most of his playing time has come at first base, and they've got Josh Bell there. But DH, maybe they give up on Avi Garcia, and that opens up a ton of playing time where they could rotate guys like this in there. So there's your deep sleeper out of nowhere who doesn't even qualify in the outfield, which is why these episodes come so long.
Outfield part.
No, he's not even an outfielder.
Another day of outfielders.
Yep, I went too far off script yet again. Happens pretty much in every position preview, but that's hopefully helping people get through the winter, right? It's January. You need things to listen to, things to watch. If you are watching this video on YouTube and you're still here at the end, thanks for hanging around. Hit the like button. If you're not watching us on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. If you'd like a subscription to The Athletic, $2 a month gets you in the door for the first year at theathletic.com/ratesandbarrels. On Twitter, you can find Eno at Eno Saris. You can find me at Derek Van Riper. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Friday.
Thanks for listening.